Do miserable books make you happy? Then this video is for you. You well-damaged unit. I asked a bunch of my favourite booktubers to recommend me a miserable or sad book they enjoyed. Some of these booktubers are the most miserable booktubers I could think of. My kind of readers. The kind of booktubers who, when you say a dog died in a novel or that it contains genocide, they get out a notebook and ask you to repeat the title, author and ISBN. But some of these booktubers, they're pure radiance, sunshine and happiness. And that's what made asking them even more intriguing. When the happy person is reading a book about cancer and loving it, don't you just want to read that book? And then some of these booktubers, I just really like the way they talk about books. Actually, that's all of these booktubers. So please, if you're unfamiliar with them at the end of this video, watch one of their videos and subscribe to their channel if you like their content. I'm going to hand you over to the booktubers and their recommendations right now, but please watch to the end. I've saved an absolutely brilliant booktuber for the very, very end, and they've got just a little surprise for you.
Hello, I'm Sean the Book Maniac, and all I read really is sad books and books that make me horny or giggle. So I've had a lifetime of reading sad books, and we'll save the horny, giggly books until Scott does another one of these projects. And out of all of those, the one I have chosen, the one that made me the saddest, the one that truly broke my heart, is Rohinton Mystery's 1995 novel, A Fine Balance. I read it 6 or 7 years ago, and I used to write reviews for Goodreads back in the day, so I'm going to read you a few lines of a very short review, because I'm not very articulate now that I'm an old man, and I was slightly articulate back then. Rohinton Mystery pushes his characters, disadvantaged folk in Indira Gandhi's India, 1975, wary strangers at first, toward each other, roping the reader into rooting for and loving them. Then, like a cruel god, he tears them asunder, raining down an apocalypse of injustices. I'm going to stop my review because I might be getting into spoiler territory, but the ending is so devastating and tragic that I actually was furious with the author, Rohinton Mystery, for what he did to me by the way he ended that novel. And I've had now several years to reflect on the fact that it was probably the perfect ending for a really devastatingly beautiful, heartbreaking story.
Hey there, it's Olivias here from Olivias Catastrophe, and today I'm here to recommend a book that is miserable and absolutely sad. And I've gone for one of the ones that I most recently read, and that's The Last Paper Crane by Kerry Drury. So this is one of those books where I really struggle to say which age audience it is. It could be young adult, but I do think it's one that you can read regardless of your age audience, and it's set in Japan, and it's about the bombing of Hiroshima, and it's absolutely devastating. And even though it's a fictional story, I think what makes it so sad is the fact that you know that this has happened to real people in real life. We start in the beginning where we're in the future and we're following a grandfather and their grandchild who are having conversations, and that section is all done in the novel in verse format, which I think is just one of those formats that expose a lot of emotion and imagery into what's happening. And then you go back into the past and you see what happens on the day and what the grandfather experienced as a young child in real time, and yeah, what it was like looking around, what it was like with the people he was with, whether people survived or didn't survive. And then you go back into the present day timeline one more time for the ending, where it kind of ties up everything in a way that feels absolutely devastating, because with a topic like this it can't help but be sad, but at the same time is in some ways hopeful. And it just captured humanity, grief, the horrors of war, the devastation, and the situation historically just so very well. It is a combination of prose, novel and verse, as I mentioned, but it also has like illustrations which are not too filled with body gore but still get across their point, and also haikus for some sections and like traditional paint patterns and such. It's just so thoughtfully and so well done, and absolutely will break your heart.
I 100% recommend The Blue Book of Nebo by Manhunt Stefan Ross, but only if you're in an emotionally stable place. If you're on the brink, don't read it. This was written in the Welsh language first of all, and the author translated it herself into English. It's about a mother, her 14-year-old son, and her 2-year-old daughter trying to make it in North Wales after a nuclear apocalypse. They spend their days gardening, hunting, going through other people's abandoned homes looking for crap, including books, because they love to read. They also, in the evenings, write in their personal journal their history of their family called The Blue Book of Nebo. The title is a play on both ancient Welsh texts with names like the Black Book of Carmarthen, and also on notoriously hated blue books that the government in London in the 1800s used to portray Welsh people as uncivilized and illiterate. Manhunt Stefan Ross writes beautifully and insightfully about things like the mother coming to the realization that she prefers life after the apocalypse because it means more, it's slower, it's more beautiful. About her son as well reading books about the times before and wondering about things like why people used to pass each other in the road and never actually acknowledge each other's presence. And also in a very Welsh way captures this idea that language and history and literature are just as important lifelines as food. Absolutely loved it, but holy crap, it's sad. Like Dead Kids and Bunnies sad. Like if you have a problem with Dead Kids and Bunnies, you should 100% not read this book because it will break you in half. If you need a good, strong, beautiful cry, this is the book for you.
Hi, I'm Kit and the book I'm going to recommend for you is Home Fire by Camilla Shamsi. It's set in contemporary Britain and it tells the story of 2 British Muslim families and the issues and concerns that face them today. One family is 3 siblings, one of which makes a very poor decision following radicalisation, and the second family has an MP as the father who's trying to shrug off his Muslim identity to further his career. This book is about identity, family and duty and the lengths people will go to for the people they love. I don't think this book will make you cry your eyes out, but it is a sad novel that will make you think and challenge your perspective on certain things. I really love when a book can change your mind about something without bashing you over the head with an idea and instead just lays out a beautiful story in front of you and says, what do you think about that? And this book absolutely nails this. Plus, the last 50 pages will take your breath away.
Hi everyone, Danny here with Spinelli Speaks. I want to first and foremost thank Scott for inviting me on this collaboration. Now, sad and miserable books aren't typically part of my repertoire, not purposefully, but I just can't really think of a lot of sad and miserable books that I have read. Unless it's something that I'm really just not paying attention to, and maybe just my heart is stone cold and black inside, that sad and miserable things don't bother me. However, there is one book that I have recently read that I think, because I am currently pregnant and have a almost 1-year-old with heart disease, I think it touched me in a certain way as far as being really sad to me. So I think books hit people in different ways. The book I'm referring to is Amy Tan's The Kitchen God's Wife. Now, this is a book about a mother-daughter relationship and a lot of secrets that they keep. And throughout the book, the mother talks about her life in China during World War II. This book has a lot of domestic violence, rape, child death, infant abuse, miscarriage, abortion. I mean, the whole gamut. So for me, it was one of those books that I had to really stop and then come back to, and then stop and come back to, because it really just hit me in the depths of my soul, especially being a mother and being pregnant and having a child that has a lifelong disease. Yeah, I guess that's all I have to say. Thanks again, Scott. I really appreciate you and all the things you do. Bye now.
Hi, Scott. Hi, Scott's viewers. I believe you are here today to hear about a book that I would recommend to Scott that I find really sad. Be recommending is Unreconciled: Family, Truth and Indigenous Resistance by Jesse Went. This is a memoir by film critic Jesse Went. He has an American father and an Anishinaabe mother, and basically it's a story of his life as a film critic, how he went from being a nerd to having established his place as a sought-after critic. It's an exploration about identity, stories, meaning, truth, fantasy, and what this reveals about people. And it's just absolutely beautiful. It's so well done. It's written in a way that made me laugh, made me sob. It's not that miserable, but points are very miserable. And overall, it's incredibly sad. He has excellent explanatory power and carries such emotional weight. Bye.
Now here is a miserable situation. The little girl who was too fond of matches. It's by Quebecois author Gaëtan Soucy, translated from French by Sheila Fishman, and it is about siblings who have been raised entirely removed from the rest of society. In the opening sentence, we find out their father has died. Now they have got to learn how to live in the world, but also come to terms with the tragedies of their past. This is family dysfunction to the max.
Hey everyone, it's Charlotte. I'm popping on here very quickly today to tell you about a translated piece of fiction called Miss Iceland. This follows the intertwined lives of three misfits in 1960s Iceland. We follow Hekla, who is our protagonist. She is a writer and she has two friends, one of whom is a new young mother and wife who is struggling to adapt to her new identity and so takes up writing. And the second one is a gay man called John, who is a sailor and just yearns to be able to live a publicly romantic relationship like the heterosexual couples around him can. While our characters are hidden away, erupting lava from the local volcano is creating a new island, foreshadowing the new spaces that social movements later on will create for our three individuals. An excellent all-rounder, great writing, great plot, great characterization. What more can we ask for as readers? And finally, thank you very much to Gemma and Scott for having me. Bye guys.
Hi, I'm here to recommend a miserable memoir for you. It's miserable but written really well. It is the Copenhagen Trilogy by Tove Ditlevsen. It is separated into three parts: childhood, youth, and dependency. The first part is childhood, and we follow Tove in the early 1920s as she navigates being a girl during this time in a working class family, as she is also discovering that she wants to become a poet. We follow her then into youth, where she is starting to come into her own, obviously is becoming interested in men and trying to still pursue poetry and writing, and she does get some success there and continues to pursue it, whatever means necessary. If that means getting married multiple times, she will do it in order to become the writer she is determined to be. And lastly, we have dependency, which is the most miserable part of this entire memoir, as she is married to a doctor who is gaslighting her and making her become a drug addict and dependent on him and the drugs in order to function throughout her day, to want to have the will to live and to continue to write, as she tries to get out of this situation that she has found herself in while still trying to be a mother and a writer. I highly recommend this memoir. It reads like fiction at times, especially when you're in dependency, which is the darkest and most miserable part of this entire memoir. It will read like fiction, it will feel unreal, but it is all very real, and you will have to bring yourself back and remind yourself that this is indeed nonfiction. I hope you enjoy this recommendation.
One thing I really appreciate about fiction is when it somehow illuminates human experience for me. Now, everyday contentment is a jolly good thing in real life, but risks being dull in a book, doesn't it? And, even intense joy and happiness and requited love, it's quite hard to pull off over an extended bit of writing, whereas loss and misery and resentment and disappointment and regret, they offer the author so much more scope, I think. Palace Walk by Naguib Mahfouz, the Egyptian author, was published in 1956. It's not an unremittingly miserable book, although, I can enjoy those. It's more that it gives the full range of emotion through looking at the lives of a family living in Old Cairo around 2 years, 1917 to 1919, and how the selfishness of the head of the family, the patriarch, brings sadness and ultimately tragedy to his wife, his children, and indeed himself. We live all that with the family, and that's what makes this a deeply satisfying novel.
To All the Wolves I'm Home by Carol Rivka Brent is both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Told from the perspective of June, our 14-year-old protagonist who has just lost her beloved Uncle Finn, the person she feels understands her best in the world, to AIDS. This novel explores the devastation of the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s and the dark bigotry that accompanied it. In that regard, it's crushing. It is also a book that I love for how beautifully it's written, for how strong the characters are, and for the relationship that June forges with Toby, who was Finn's partner. It's through that relationship and their shared memories and their shared grief and their shared compassion that we find redemption and acceptance and all of the hopeful aspects of humanity that make us feel hopeful. I hope you like it.
A sad or depressing book that I really loved was Don't Cry for Me by Dr. Daniel Black. This is a book that follows a father who is in his end days, and he's sitting down to pen a letter to his son. His son is gay and he has rejected him. He's treated him with a lot of homophobia throughout his life, and he's basically writing this letter to try to explain to him who he is and why he responded the way he is. It seems that he has a lot of regret for their relationship, and he's not necessarily making excuses, just trying to give his son some understanding and some context. This book dives into some really difficult topics. It's very, very tragic. And ultimately, I don't know if one can sit down and read this without feeling some sort of emotional impact. I really, really loved it, and I felt like I was thinking about it for days after I finished reading it.
Hey y'all, it's me, Kevy. Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin is one of the most painful books I have ever read. It has trans people getting beaten, raped, executed, trafficked. A whole army of TERFs rise up and use this virus as an excuse for mass genocide. It is a horrific, really hard read, but oh god did I love it. The trans characters, especially Beth, were just so well developed and so relatable and really made me feel seen like no other book had at that point. So yeah, even though it's shitty and hurtful and dark as fuck, definitely recommend Manhunt.
Hello fans of gunpowder fiction and plot. I'm here in my Audi to recommend some miserable books because there is nothing better on like a rainy winter's night than wrapping yourself up in Audi or with a little glass of your beverage of choice and a miserable book that's going to make you snot on yourself. I really like explorations of grief, so I have two recommendations for you. Number one is I'm From Nowhere by Lindsay Lerman, which is an exploration of a woman's grief after her husband dies. It's a very bleak, very short book, novella maybe, that is set in like post-climate change. It's very stark. There's lots of misogyny and lots of questions of identity and how that changes when you've been married to someone for a long time and then they die. So that is recommendation number one. Recommendation number two is a much less stark but much more emotional exploration of grief and loss and missing someone in Our Wives Under the Sea, which is about a lesbian spousal relationship where one woman stays at home and the other woman goes on what should be a 2-week submarine journey and disappears for 6 months. And when she does come back, she's all weird. I actually cried for that one, so I think that that is my favourite. Happy misery!
Hello, my name is Gemma and I'm from Gemma Books. And Scott has asked me to recommend a book for our collaborative readathon at Misery May. And so the book I'm going to recommend to you that will stomp on your heart is The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby Dari. Now, I have picked this book because, yes, it will stamp on your heart and make you very cross and all of those things, but there is a sliver of hope and joy in this book as well. So in this, we follow a young girl, Adunni, as she is forced to become third wife to an older man, and what her experience in that is. And throughout this story, the shining light is Adunni's desire for education, her desire to become more than what is expected of her. And she is such a phenomenal character, but she goes through some significant trauma in this book. Trigger warnings everywhere, but such a brilliant book, and I couldn't recommend it any more highly. That is the book I am going to recommend. If you are interested in seeing the booktubers that I asked for devastating, heartrending, miserable books, you can catch my video right here. Scott will see you very soon with another one. Bye guys.